Everyone. Today we'll be talking about finding your baseline from a pure mind-body perspective and how to avoid the push-crash cycle. Just for some background, this presentation was really created to give healers another avenue than some of the typical baseline and pacing strategies that are available today. I often hear that people struggle to find their baseline and they get stuck on their recovery journey. I've also witnessed healers switch from a baseline pacing strategy where they were seeing very little improvement into a TMS model or other brain training strategy and have very fast recoveries. So by putting these baseline ideas into a different framework, I'm hoping to open up doors for those that might find that they are beating themselves up for not doing baseline and pacing right. And I want them to know that there is another way. I also want to provide guidance to those that are still pushing and crashing or playing it safe so that they can heal too. If you have recovered with baseline and pacing or are currently progressing with that strategy, please keep doing that. This presentation isn't for you. It's not meant to mitigate anyone's recovery efforts. It's simply to offer another way. So if you don't know who I am, I have suffered chronic migraine for 20 years and multiple chronic diagnoses. There's a long list. Usually when you have chronic illness or chronic symptoms, there seems to be several that people experience. I then experienced almost 5 years of chronic fatigue, then back injury, and then long COVID. And the most severe that I was housebound for a while. I tried all of the Western medicine and alternative routes before turning to Mindbody in about 2020. And from 2020 to current, which is 2025, I've done about 15 programs, met with multiple coaches, read numerous books, and always watch recovery videos. In 2023, I started a grassroots Facebook community where we started sharing free mind-body recovery information. In 2025, I recovered and started coaching around expansion for those that have taken at least 2 programs and were still finding it difficult. I also provide a few other services. I work part-time by choice. I am a grandmother, and I just finished up some trauma-informed yoga teacher training. My next certification I'm going to be looking into is somatic experiencing and either the felt sense polyvagal model or inner relationship focusing. Because I'm a recovering type A overachiever, I'm also practicing doing less in life to enjoy more fully, pursuing passion and a fulfilling life. So I'm not trying to fill up my plate, but I'm also still living very busy and fulfilled. So just want to put this out there, a disclaimer. I am not a medical professional by any means. This is not medical advice. Please check with your provider for anything personal to your health, only for educational purposes and not a substitute for a diagnosis, treatment, or individualized care. It's just my opinion based on my studies and my lived experience through recovery. So what are we going to be talking about today? I try to make this a very short lesson, but this could be broken out into probably 8 different lessons. So I'm going to highlight some of the things, but as always, you can dive deep into any one of these subjects. So first, we'll start out with the root cause of the illness because that kind of sets the framework for what I'll be discussing today. We'll talk about the great rest debate, what finding your baseline actually means. I'll talk about the window of tolerance, unhealthy cycle like the push-crash cycle. Talk about how baseline can get really complex to figure out. We'll talk about pacing, how to stabilize, and then a little bit about expansion. as well as widening your window and increasing your capacity. So to understand different perspectives on baseline and pacing, we first have to start with what one might believe about this illness. Most baseline and pacing strategies are centered around chronic fatigue syndrome and long COVID having a root cause of either mitochondria dysfunction, a nervous system issue with mitochondria dysfunction. Some people believe it's a neuroinflammation disease, or there's still viral load, and that could be viral load from like EBV, long COVID, the herpes simplex virus. So the belief is that there's a number of spoons of energy, or that energy is limited, so energy needs to be managed. Usually most discussions around baseline go hand in hand with pacing, so we'll discuss that later in the presentation as well. When you look at the root cause of chronic fatigue or long COVID through a pure mind-body lens, we can understand that this is a very physical illness. The symptoms are real. We're not imagining them, we're not creating them, but that our thoughts, emotions, and patterns influence what is happening physiologically. So the root cause theories that work with what I'll be discussing today is nervous system dysregulation, HPA axis or hypothalamus overload, bodily distress syndrome, central sensitization syndrome, limbic system impairment, repressed and suppressed emotions. So if you've been in the mind-body world for a while, you might have heard of all these. What I talk about today will cover all of these. So based on these root cause theories, I believe using the window of tolerance is a better way to guide recovery. And we'll get more into that. So along with baseline and pacing is usually a recommendation to rest a lot. And this is mainly due to the belief that PEM, post-exertional malaise, or fatigue symptoms are caused by depleted ATP, and that you need to wait, a certain amount of time for ATP to replenish based on the Krebs cycle. So I'll be talking about resting versus regulating. So I just wanted to say up front that rest and restoration or restorative activity are part of living a healthy, balanced life. We do need additional rest, especially after illness or viruses, surgeries, car accidents, or any other high impact to the body. Based on severity of symptoms or impact to the body, this can look like a few days to several months. Someone that just, got over a common cold could have a different recovery timeline than someone who just got over a more serious virus like RSV, for instance. One friend I talked to recently had their doctor prescribe a friend of theirs to stay home for an additional 2 months after they had recovered from mono, just for precautionary purposes. So no one is debating here that rest is important. However, I will present other options to rest when we have PEM and fatigue symptoms. I just want to point out that we do also need balance and restoration when we're not sick. It's just a healthy habit. So I wanted to make that clear as we go through these slides where I stand on rest in general. I'm not saying don't rest. I'm not saying push. Almost everybody across the board in the mind, body, or other fields that believe it's more of a physical cause advocate for not pushing. So in chronic illness recovery, baseline or finding your baseline is defined as identifying the current state of mental, social, physical, and emotional activity, which allows you to avoid significant symptom increases. Baseline and pacing are required if you believe that ATP depletion is the cause of the symptoms. However, other experts have argued that PEM and fatigue are actually learned neural pathways. They can show up during stress, perceived stress, subconscious danger, emotional stress, and a number of other reasons, not just physical exertion. which would deplete the ATP. Stabilizing your baseline is noticing the place where your symptoms are most manageable or your nervous system feels most balanced and steady within your current window of tolerance. So the window of tolerance was coined by Dr. Dan Siegel out of the UCLA School of Medicine, and it refers to the range of emotional and physiological states that a person can function optimally. So if we look at this from a window of tolerance perspective, it's a state where you can stay regulated enough to think, feel, and respond flexibly. It's important to remember, though, that window of tolerance is fluid. It can shift and change all of the time. So knowing your baseline helps you notice when you've moved outside of this window and gives you the opportunity to use regulation tools to guide yourself back over time. This practice expands your window, helping you build greater steadiness, flexibility, and resilience. So from a polyvagal perspective, our baseline is ideally the ventral vagal state. But in chronic illness, many of us spend most of our time stuck in the other two survival states or a mixed state. But for simplicity, we'll just be referring to the polyvagal states as the three states of fight, flight, or sympathetic, ventral, vagal, and dorsal shutdown. So in chronic illness, many of us spend most of our time stuck in these survival states, sympathetic or shutdown, and some of us have never consistently experienced a ventral dominant state our entire lives. Because of this, we may not even know what true ventral safety feels like. So in practice, stabilization might first look like finding steadiness within whatever state that you're in. So if you're stuck in a shutdown state or you're stuck in a sympathetic state, finding stabilization within that state before gradually moving towards more ventral dominance. So again, baseline is something that keeps you steady. In this slide, we see that for people with a trauma background, high stress, or chronic illness, the window of tolerance can be really narrow, especially for those that are currently in a moderate or severe range in a chronic illness, and especially chronic fatigue. You can be housebound or severe and bedbound. So their window of tolerance is going to be really narrow. When the window is this small, even a little additional stress or stimulation can push someone outside of that window. And symptoms can flare, they can get worse at that time. At this stage, the nervous system is also really inflexible. So once you get pushed out of that, moving back inside the window can be pretty challenging and take a longer time than someone with a more flexible nervous system or with a wider window. Being within your window, again, doesn't necessarily mean that you're symptom free. It often looks like symptoms staying just relatively steady from day to day, even if those symptoms are quite high, and your activity levels being consistent, even if they're quite low. When we get caught in a boom and bust cycle, also known as a push crash cycle, we can end up stuck just going around in circles. We're doing too much, we're flaring in symptoms, and we're not understanding why, and then feeling really frustrated, which keeps us in a fight or flight survival state. With each crash, hope can diminish and our belief in recovery weakens. Over time, the cycle can actually lead to a narrowing of the window of tolerance. It also can lead to lowered activity levels and feeling even more stuck. So another way to look at it is when someone is feeling good and they're swinging between 0% and 100%, their average activity, whether it's social, physical, cognitive, or emotional, ends up only being about 50%. But if someone aims to be steady around 70%, you support balance in your nervous system, which leads to more sustainable progress. Now, this 70% is just a number I came up with. There's no scientific data that I'm taking it from, and it doesn't equate to what people consider, say, for the energy envelope, doing 70 or 80% of your energy that's available, because we're putting energy aside. But the key here in a boom or bust cycle is to slow down in order to go faster. So find out how you can stabilize so that you have additional days where your body feels good. I advocate for doing self-care while you're well or feeling at least a little bit better, so it doesn't only happen when you're forced into doing self-care during a flare or a crash. So we want to honor our limits, accepting and surrendering to what is current, rather than what you should be able to do or what you used to be able to do before you got chronically ill. That creates a foundation for healing and sustainable recovery. On the other end of the spectrum is a safe and steady cycle. When people don't fully understand how symptoms are created or don't yet trust in the body's ability to recover, they may become fearful of both symptoms and activity. So they protect themselves. They stay safe by avoiding anything that could trigger symptoms. While this can feel better in the moment, it can also lead to getting stuck in a circle and gradually lowering activity. Over time, this avoidance can cause our world to grow smaller and smaller, keeping us from expansion and from being able to recover. So oftentimes, if someone spends a significant amount of time booming and busting or pushing and flaring, they end up in this safe and steady cycle because their fear has increased, their safety has lowered, and they're really not sure how to navigate healing. So the goal isn't to stay in constant expansion or constant safety. It's to be able to flexibly expand and contract. So gently moving between the two, our nervous system learns that both activity and restorative activities are safe. Over time, this flexibility helps the window of tolerance widen, giving us more capacity to recover with resilience. So as you can see here on the graph, the window of tolerance increases. We're still hitting dips. We're still hitting some plateaus or leveling out so that our body and nervous system can adjust and gain confidence and resiliency and know that it can then go out and expand and then respond well to symptoms. And the average will go up over time. At the beginning, it might seem really slow, but it does lead to great wins. So why do people find it hard to establish a baseline? And this baseline is in the traditional standards of, trying to find your baseline and then pacing. The reason why it is really hard is because multiple triggers can cause symptom flares. It's not just exertion. There's brain associated or what some call conditioned responses that cause it. So that means that your brain has labeled exercise or exertion or anything heavy with dangerous. So it's going to send symptoms if you're exposed to that. But there's also emotional or unmet needs. Emotions are seen as dangerous. And emotions use the same pain pathways in the brain. There's also the symptom fear cycle that can trigger more flares or bigger flares. So you get a symptom, you're in this fear loop, and it's just adding fuel to the fire and increasing your symptoms, and they're getting louder and louder. There's also a post-conflict phase that comes from German New Medicine. We don't have time to go into detail of any of these triggers, but just giving you a quick overview. So the brain-associated triggers, as discussed by experts such as Alan Gordon and Dr. Howard Schubner, require retraining the conscious and subconscious that X activities or Y foods or Z emotions or being social is safe. This happens by building up exposures, collecting evidence, and forming positive associations. With baseline, other symptom triggers are often ignored and can be confusing when symptoms arrive. So the healer is associating the flare with maybe exertion or another brain-associated trigger, food, for example, which reinforces the neural pathway that we want to be rewiring. Baseline and window of tolerance is fluid. It contracts and dips. It contracts after a dip. It contracts during a virus. It contracts after a virus, post-virus. It contracts with emotional stress, and it contracts based on your allostatic or stress load. So when a baseline is set and you're trying to stick to a baseline, allostatic load can push one above that window of tolerance, and the healer can misinterpret exertion, for example, as being the cause. Or a healer can try and stick to a baseline when their window of tolerance is actually lower and end up flaring more and decreasing that window of tolerance, because then fear can override their understanding of the evidence. So patients get into a stress response when they go slightly over their baseline sometimes, and they're in a fear state again, and they're not understanding that a baseline or like stability doesn't have to be that rigid. So fear again can set in and exacerbates things. And they go down this negative downward spiral where their abilities get less and less. Other healers who can't hold a baseline, like parents or those that are required to work, might become discouraged and distraught, becoming hopeless that they won't be able to heal. Nervous system shutdown in itself can be a brain-associated trigger. In some, for any activation or stress, the trigger could be that, and so automatically it goes into shutdown. And it has nothing to do with baseline activity level. Many healers experience flares when they're doing things that are social versus physical. So I've seen many clients that have a hard time expanding physically, but they might get PM for being social. So it doesn't tie in to the baseline pacing and ATP therapy. I have other clients that have a hard time with the physical part, but they don't need to track social, and they can go out and do social things. It doesn't cause flares. So it's really based on your experiences in life, your experience with the symptoms, and your experience with the chronic illness and your beliefs behind those. So my point here is that baselines can start to feel like an elusive target. So let's talk about pacing. As I mentioned, it goes hand in hand with baseline strategies. Does it work? Yes, for some, it definitely works. I've seen many people heal on pacing and baseline schedules or strategies. And the reason is because it creates safety, and that's the goal. Our nervous system and brain need to get into a space of safety. Safety increases and the perception of exertion decreases. So if pacing worked or is working for you, that's great. Please keep doing what works. As they say, there's many paths that lead to the same destination. This recovery journey might take more time by using this strategy, in my opinion, but it can build steadiness and resilience. I do want to highlight some limitations of pacing, though. While most pacing approaches emphasize rest, the challenge is that rest alone doesn't address every aspect of healing. Relying only on rest as a tool is a bit like trying to build a house with just a hammer. It's useful, or it can be useful in some cases, but there are so many more effective and updated tools available. Think of a crying baby. The crying could mean hunger, if the baby's tired, it's uncomfortable, or just needs some kind of connection, just wants to be held. But if we're always choosing the same response of putting a bottle in its mouth, for example, we might be missing what the baby really needs. It's the same thing with our nervous system and our brain. With chronic illness, always choosing rest to treat fatigue or PEM can sometimes miss the mark. Rest can certainly bring temporary relief, but it's often that it's because it removes the person from the responsibilities or stressors that were creating the emotional distress, relationships, job pressures, chores, not because rest itself was the deeper need. This is similar to the way many people see food as a trigger, migraine in my case. If I stop eating a certain food, I might feel better temporarily, but not because the food was harmful. The relief may come from reducing the brain's association with that trigger or the exposure to it, or reducing stress load overall, not from eliminating the food itself. So when you're in fight or flight, the body diverts energy away from the digestive system. So when you're in a stress state, the food might not be able to be digested. And if you get symptoms, the brain can then associate that food as dangerous. Same thing with exertion. The brain is mislabeling these things as dangerous. So rest isn't bad or wrong, but if it's the only tool you rely on based on an outdated understanding of the illness, it can keep you from discovering the many other practices that help your nervous system regulate and heal. Attuning to the needs of the body and mind and matching a tool in the moment is where the magic happens, in my opinion. You can see my posts that have a hashtag regulation tools in the groups for more information on various regulation tools. I'll be doing those weekly for some time. And for me, I've seen this make enormous shifts in not only my own healing, but with others as well. When a coach asked me why I was resting and that I didn't need to rest, that I wasn't doing anything a normal, healthy person would get tired from, that was one of the biggest shifts for me. And I was able to stop retreating to my bed for that. So thank you, Jim Frisak from the Pain PT. And while I'm saying this, I want to go back to my first slides where I talked about rest. It's important when sleep is needed. When you're healthy, tired, rest is important. Fatigue symptoms from chronic illness in your body feels different. I was able to differentiate between fatigue and tired. Dr. John Eaton, in his book, Reverse Therapy, talks about the feeling of fatigue and tired and being able to differentiate those. I believe even Rebecca Tolan has a fatigue versus tired document with her program. So being able to differentiate being healthy tired versus being fatigued, where you have all of these other chronic symptoms going along with it. You have heaviness in your limbs, you have inflammation type feelings, you might have pain that goes along with it. And when you're just healthy tired, your body just wants to lay down and rest. And rest relieves that symptom is the other key. So I just want to go over a few ideas of where pacing strategy can fail in case you're thinking about doing pacing or in case it hasn't been working for you. So pacing will fail if it's too rigid. When pacing is treated like a strict schedule or rule book, it can increase stress rather than reduce it. And we're looking to get out of the fight or flight or get out of these dorsal survival states when we're trying to heal. So people can become overly focused on timers, activity logs, rules, which reinforce the fear of symptoms instead of building trust in the body. Pacing strategy can fail based on fear-based avoidance. So pacing sometimes turns into avoiding anything that might trigger symptoms. Instead of gradually expanding, the nervous system learns that activity is unsafe, keeping people in a cycle of fear. It can also fail if a pacing strategy lacks flexibility. Symptoms in our nervous system, like we talked about from a window of tolerance lens, do fluctuate. So a rigid pacing plan doesn't always allow for that flexibility for responding to the body's signals in real time. It reinforces limiting beliefs. If pacing is tied to the belief that there's something physically wrong in the body or has permanent energy limitations like damaged mitochondria, it can reinforce the idea that healing isn't possible. This mindset really does keep people stuck rather than opening the door to recovery through neuroplasticity. Even with pacing, that push crash still can happen. Doing more than planned, especially if stress or increase in activities unplanned, can cause fear in the person. If they went over the baseline, it can ramp up the fear, and that can cause a crash in itself. Pacing strategy can fail if it isn't integrated with regulation tools. So if you are following a pacing and baseline strategy, hopefully you've also learned some regulation tools, and maybe some emotional processing tools, and how to gradually expand or expose yourself to the stimuli that are causing the symptoms. So I just want to point out that I believe pacing can be a difficult path to follow for healing because it's mainly both based around physical activity, whereas PEM can be caused by emotional triggers in them themselves. And I experienced that without any other physical exertion or changes while I was going through the death of my mom this past year. So baselines don't really account for emotional fluctuations. They can't be anticipated or planned. And PM or fatigue can actually be turned off. I've turned them off before I was really understanding the Mindbody strategy with cold plunges. I've turned them off trying nicotine patches. And there's many people that have turned them off with nicotine patches, but once they get off the nicotine patch, because they don't understand how to respond to symptoms, how they were created, and they have no other regulation tools, their symptoms often come back, the crashes come back. So if it was a mitochondria issue and you needed pacing for that, a nicotine patch wouldn't resolve that. I've also turned PM off with brain retraining. I've turned it off with emotional work. I've turned it off with somatics. I'm not the only one. There's many people that do. It also doesn't explain why someone can do brain retraining and go from bedbound to hiking if they needed to pace or if they had mitochondria damage. I believe rest isn't what's needed. Retraining of the brain and nervous system out of outdated patterns is really the key. So this is the last slide on pacing. I just wanted to talk a little bit about pacing schedules and pacing devices like heart rate monitors, monitoring your HRV, limiting the anaerobic threshold. All of that can cause hypervigilance, and many brain retraining programs and experts, such as Dr. Howard Schubner, advise against using these. I also tried those. I tried a Garmin watch, and I tried tracking my steps when I was really fearful of symptoms and really fearful of activity, and it didn't help me. Tracking my heart rate kept me focused on what was going wrong in my body and didn't allow me to move into that ventral vagal calm and safe space. So in these brain retraining programs, they talk about wanting to avoid linking activities directly to symptoms. We want to avoid linking activities, like I said, directly to symptoms. So that means that we don't want to track symptoms or reinforce them. We don't want to reinforce those patterns that are already created in our brain. In brain retraining, the goal is to break those old associations and create new positive ones. So for example, exercise is usually in CFS or Long Covid labeled in our brain as dangerous. We want to create a healthy association that exercise is actually really good for us. It's healthy for us and it actually gives us energy. Another healthy association would be people, light, sound, food, or disrupted sleep is not dangerous. So by consistently reinforcing these new associations, the nervous system learns safety instead of threat. So if you're going to track anything or track symptoms, I would only do it to gain emotional awareness or try to learn the body messages or the messages that your body's trying to send, not to track energy use. Instead of hyper focusing on energy expenditure, something those with CFS and Long COVID are already doing consciously, both consciously and actually subconsciously. We want to break that loop. We don't want to hyper focus on what energy is going outwards. Tracking every ounce of energy reinforces the alarm pathways in the brain. The shift is to refocus on thriving behaviors, joy, ease, calm, connection, and fulfillment. Tracking cognitive, emotional versus physical just isn't necessary. And I want to say this one more time. If resting is working for you, please keep doing it. I'm not advocating for pushing. I'm advocating for other options for those where they understand the illness from a mind-body perspective, and resting and pacing just hasn't worked for them. I want to back up some of these ideas from different experts, and one of them is Jan Rothstein, who is the author of Breaking Free. She's recovered from CFS, from severe bedbound state, a few times, and is very versed in the science. You can go to her website, and she has a variety of scientific articles on this subject. And she writes in her book, the belief that energy is finite and you have to limit what you should be challenged, what you do should be challenged. This belief restricts people, keeping them stuck and oftentimes lowering their threshold. Life becomes a nightmare of trying to manage imaginary spoonfuls of energy. When you start measuring activity, distance, and time, you are adapting to the illness. The belief that energy is finite is an unhealthy belief. There is not limited battery or pool of energy to use up. Believing that you will pay for exertion puts fear into people and blame that their symptoms or crash is their fault. So the guidance on adaptive pacing therapy to help manage CFS is based on energy envelope, the pacing theory. You are told to take regular rest periods throughout the day, even if you feel good, because you have limited energy. Energy, she says, is constantly created in the mitochondria, and production is only halted when we get stuck in survival states. And survival states, are also called stress states by others. I do want to point out that later in her book, Jan does talk about life being about balance and harmony, saying that it is healthy to rest, but not to rest for the sake of it when you're feeling fine and energized. Rest when your body wants a break. Learn to listen to your body and recognize when it's good to rest. She says rest with ease and peace, not while in a bad, maladaptive, or stressed state. Healthy people know how to balance work, rest, and play as part of their lifestyle. And I think what she's saying there is, we got into chronic illness, living unbalanced or living emotionally unwell. So recreating that as we get better, like a healthy person would, in balance. I want to also provide, with permission from Rachel, part of Rachel Whitfield's blog post on this subject. She fully recovered from long COVID and is now back to running marathons. So she says that pacing is a very inflammatory word. Normal, healthy people don't count steps and anticipate a crash if they go over their steps. Normal people don't try and do half of what they think they should do to keep themselves inside of an envelope. If normal people feel tired, they rest, but with kindness, not fear. They don't catastrophize about what it means. If this behavior and then the subconscious expectation check, it's this behavior, sorry, and the subconscious expectation of checking for symptoms give meaning that starts to drive the crash, not the activity itself. So to put it another way, it's the fear of the relapse that drives the relapse. In the early stages of illness, building up slowly is key, but later on, this careful behavior starts to create the ongoing illness. Overwhelm, worry, and doubt, perhaps the primitive nervous system checking in to make sure you're okay in response to your thoughts, can create feelings of anxiety and then subsequent symptoms. You will not run out of energy 24 hours later. Energy doesn't work like that. You may feel tired the next day after doing more. Part of getting well is not attaching a negative meaning to this tired feeling and learning to be okay with being tired again. Healthy people feel tired too and may decide to rest after lots of activity, but will do so with kindness. Worry and fear can increase the stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol, which will eventually leave you more fatigued. This is what gives life to long COVID, or I would say also CFS symptoms. There's no such thing as a body battery. The fear of only having so much energy and the fear that you may do permanent damage creates the perfect storm that keeps the condition alive. What she believes PM is about is not about running out of energy, it's about stress. Stress is the culprit in all of this. Stress and beliefs that contribute to the stress. Adrenaline and cortisol, which are stress chemicals, are released in response to stress and can't fire indefinitely. This is why when she did the lightning process and suddenly saw PM for what it was, she was able to go out and do a 5K just like that. Because when you change your beliefs, you come out of fear. You stop firing stress hormones and you can deal with the anxiety and symptoms because you know what they are. So you can respond well to the symptoms. She talks about the energy envelope and says, what a load of rubbish. Energy doesn't work like that. And isn't it funny that some people can walk in the house all day long and be fine, but run out of energy if they step outside the house? Others can't read, but they can be on Facebook all day. When we are engaged in joyful activity, we create energy. When we are engaged in an activity that we believe is dangerous, it puts us into fight or flight and we drain our energy that way. So it's not the activity, but the meaning we put on the activity. This is why people can rest all day and still not feel energized. They are stuck in fear. Getting out of fear and convincing ourselves and our body that we are well and can do normal activities. This is what is key to getting better. So fatigue and PM is just another symptom. And this is according to a variety of different experts and programs like DNRS, Lightning Process, The Switch, Samaya Heal, Dan Buglio from Pain for You, Jim Prisak from the Pain PT, Dr. Howard Schubner, Ellen Gordon, Dr. Becca Kennedy, Dr. John Eaton. You can look up these programs or purchase their books or watch their YouTube videos and find out that they categorize fatigue and PM just like any other chronic symptom that's either pain related or, digestive, upset, etc. I do think it's important to differentiate, being tired, that, rest is needed for that, like I said, and fatigue symptoms are more of an illness symptom. I think where most people get confused is that they were told we got into this illness because we were overdoing things in life or we were overstressed. And although that might be true, it's a simplistic answer for a pretty complex illness. And naturally they come up with, well, we need to rest more because we were doing too much. But actually, I believe we need to live differently. Living a life with emotional honesty, living life in a balanced way with fulfillment, with boundaries, etc. And understanding how the brain can create chronic symptoms is important. If we fear a migraine or a reaction to an exercise, understanding the brain science will allow you to understand how chronic symptoms stick around. Then being able to respond well to stress or change perceptions around stress or regulate stressful states in our body is important. 9 more slides. So another consideration is Dr. Mickle, David Mickle, if you have not heard of him, he's been in this field for 25 years, helping people heal from chronic fatigue syndrome. He says actually that pacing and graduated exercise therapy presume that fatigue symptoms are primarily physical or psychological and can be overcome by slowly building up activity levels. So he doesn't even advocate for expansion or gradual expansion. The assumption is that fatigue is something to be controlled or managed through this gradual exposure and discipline. It overlooks a critical element, he says, the deeper causative emotional signals from your body consciousness. So he feels that fatigue is actually a body's way of telling you it needs genuine joy or purposeful engagement, not forced activity. So if we are forcing ourselves to walk down the same street every day to, expose ourselves to activity, that's why it could be backfiring. He says PEM traditionally is seen as a physiological crash following exertion. It's not. It's your body. It's not your body punishing you for activity. It's your body consciousness, or your body mind, or your intuition reacting negatively when it anticipates returning to boredom or an unfulfilling routine after experiencing enjoyment or meaningful activity. So the suggestion is to find out activities that genuinely nourish your soul, reconnecting you with joy and purposeful living is the true path to recovery. So I take some of his ideas and gradual exposure and combine them for my own strategies or coaching. So we come to the answers of, what we first started off with was, how to stop that push crash cycle. And I won't use baseline, but I'll use stabilize. So how to get off the roller coaster. I believe the first important thing is knowledge is power. So we got to understand the illness from a mind-body perspective. That will accelerate recovery in itself. Having that good foundational education of how symptoms get created and how symptoms are reinforced. This can be achieved through a program that resonates with you, such as, or books such as Breaking Free or Unlearn Your Pain, The Way Out, Heal Your Nervous System, or Widen Your Window. Number 2 is accepting and honoring your current limitations. It might seem like an energy issue, but it's not. It's a narrowed window of tolerance. Your energy is in the body is being consumed by the stress states. Our nervous system flexibility has become limited. You could coin it the brain associations as neurological limitations. But those can be changed, and emotional limitations. We haven't learned how to manage emotions or express emotions correctly. So that can be blocking energy or causing symptoms. And then when you do start feeling better, know that signs of recovery, when you do start feeling better, that they are just that. We haven't recovered yet. Recovering goes through, most of the time goes through several like progress cycles. So think of it, as a staircase, cyclical going upwards. So those signs of recovery are just that we are recovering, that we do have hope for recovery. But once we start feeling good and we go back to doing what we think we should be doing, or what we think we should be capable of, like, I feel better this day, so I feel like I can go out and, run a marathon today. Or, I feel better, so I feel like I can take all the responsibilities back on for work and, being a mother and a daughter and a wife, for example. The time for recovery really varies based on different layers of the recovery onion and based on several factors. So there's a lot of learning with this illness and sometimes layers, personality patterns, for example. So when we're going through this, just knowing that we do have temporary limitations that are not mitochondria related, but sometimes doing less is more in order to just gain stability and show our body and our brain that it can trust us again and it can feel good. That less is more is not forever. We sometimes just have to go slow at first to speed up later. And then number 3 is responding well to symptoms. Build a toolbox that works for you, whether it's somatic tracking or brain retraining or meditation. Try different things on and find ways that will help you respond to symptoms well. That means being indifferent. That means being able to ride out the wave instead of being in, frustration and fear, aggravation, and exacerbating the situation. And then number 4 is you can start to gain knowledge on the difference of the triggers. Some are brain associated or conditioned responses, but it's not the only one. So long-term recovery really is finding ways that fill your cup, being in tune with your body mind or your body wisdom, also called attunement, will allow fulfillment if the messages are listened to and acted on. Understanding how neuroplasticity and learned pain or chronic symptoms work. Be aware and act when it shows up so that we can avoid this long-term chronic pain or chronic symptom pathway. Look at doing some inner child work or inner parts work to heal some of the past trauma. And then gain some emotional intelligence, learning how to constructively action emotions will be lifetime skills. If you do want to track something, I would suggest a color coding scheme that I use with clients to generally track blocks of time during the day, to make sure that when you do feel good and you do have energy, that you understand how you're using that. Again, not to manage an energy envelope, but to ensure emotional wellness. Joy and emotional wellness give us energy, make us feel good. So blue would be for restorative activities like rest or regulation tools or reading or nature watching, more of the like flow hobbies, maybe art. Green is for fun and enjoyable things that fill our cup, that light us up. And red would be energy draining activities. Maybe it's a mother-in-law that you don't want to talk to, or a neighbor that you really despise. Some responsibilities or burdens. So again, here, the key is emotional wellness is what we're looking for. Stabilizing allows a little more capacity in the window of tolerance because it's no longer shrinking it and we're feeling safer. So stabilizing allows for the brain to remember and believe I can feel good or better. I can heal instead of constantly fighting these increased symptoms. A lot of times our emotional wellness is based on, using our energy or our feel-good days for doing things for others versus self. So we want to make sure that we're not pouring from an empty cup, that we're filling our needs first before others. Because when we're always doing for others, always doing responsible things, we're living out of alignment and it sucks the light out of our souls. Our body wants to thrive, wants to have balance, wants to live an enjoyable life. So one of the keys that or tips that you can look into is, your personality pushing you or your conditioning from childhood, pushing you to do things out of habit. Maybe you don't know that your needs are important. Your need for enjoyment, need for restoration, for self-care, for ease and peace. If you do have a lot of responsibility, maybe changing the perspective on that. Stress is really how we interpret things. And so if we perceive that demands are higher than resources, it causes stress. So can these ideas fail too? Yes, of course. If one doesn't understand why symptoms are happening, it can. So learning more deeply about the illness, about your beliefs and strategies to get out, even if it takes multiple trials and errors. So what does it look like from a practical standpoint? So if you're severe, maybe adding more green to your day by doing visualizations or looking for glimmers and savoring them. That could be looking at a plant on a wall or nature through the window or repeating a mantra in your mind. When you're resting, ensuring that it's going to be restorative rest without frustration, anger, worry, or catastrophizing. And then reducing any of the red blocks as much as possible. If you're moderate, maybe ensuring more green and blue outweigh the red blocks of time during your day. Are you feeling better just to do something you hate? Start with filling your cup with enjoyable things. That's what creates energy and emotional wellness. Add chores and responsibilities later, if at all possible. Put your recovery first. If you're mild, ensuring more green and blue outweigh the red. Are you creating a life you love, a life that is fulfilling, or are old patterns coming up? Adding space to your schedule so that life can be enjoyed instead of just done. Just looking at task lists versus we want to experience life. Dr. John Eaton with reverse therapy talks about living a balanced life, balancing burdens with restorative activities, balancing inside activities with outside of the home, solitude and connection. And then for mild states, you could possibly start some inner child or parts work to update, to the current mindset. Overall, check your beliefs and mindset about the illness and symptoms. Regulate as much as possible without a fix-it mindset, which is key, to ensure your nervous system state is moving towards ventral. Symptoms are at, so that way symptoms are at an emotionally manageable level. So now that we understand stabilizing, in order to increase the window of tolerance, we have to expand in order to widen our world. We want to reteach the brain and nervous system that, these triggers are safe, build trust with our body. Our body is not broken, but that we're no longer going to override our inner child or our body wisdom. But we want to bring it along with us, update it, and work with it. Once stabilized, try expansion with good strategies, good tools, a good mindset, and good beliefs. Dips and flares of all sizes are likely to come. So each time they come, know that it's expected. And just respond well and act on the message or emotion that your body might be sending you in order to level up your recovery. Symptom flares don't have to be setbacks or crashes. We learn how to tweak our life with each one. There's always something I learned from every dip or flow that I had. Some healers can do this on their own and some need guidance. It can be really tricky for some, especially because oftentimes emotions are the last thing to address in one's healing journey. And again, brain-associated triggers aren't the only trigger for your symptoms. Some people can get better faster with flooding. That's another expansion option, but it's difficult for many because when we flood, we just go out and, do these big expansions and then sometimes can't emotionally handle the symptom flare that comes along with it because bigger you expand, the possible bigger flare that you're going to have, and you have to your response has to rise to that level. You can research exposure therapy. Doctors do it in offices with like allergy shots, microdosing with food activity like dairies and nuts, for example. So for expansion, there's really no scheduled or preemptive rests that are needed because energy, again, is not the issue. It's just another symptom or a reflection of our nervous system state. Regulation is the key to help move symptoms. So long-term, making choices to live a balanced, fulfilled life. Learning normal tiredness versus fatigue. We already talked about that. And while expanding, I do just want to say that you will find some brain association are stronger than others. So some can expand sporadically, physically, but not socially, and vice versa. So tracking expenditure in this area just holds someone back, in my opinion. So I experienced, fast expansion when I did do NRS originally for migraines. I was able to add back foods and I didn't have to specifically train on each one. I was just, my stress levels had went down, my dose chemicals had went up with the training. I knew it was a brain association. I started living my life and didn't have to do extensive incremental training is what they call it in their program. When I had CFS, though, I can expand in social, I can expand in a lot of different things. I was able to get my foods back up because the foods were affected differently with CFS. But exercise was like my biggest trigger. It was the deepest neural pathway that I had to retrain, but I didn't do it in a schedule. I didn't take preemptive rest. In some ways, I was able to expand in multiple areas at one time with exercise. It just really depends on the person. But those stronger associations don't mean that something's physically wrong with our body. It's just that we need to work on, they need more work and possibly related to the belief behind it as well. We also want to stabilize an expansion. So we don't want to expand all the time. We want to enjoy what you can do currently. Maintain for a bit, stabilize, then progress. Allow your body to feel safe and good for a while. Again, recharging is a healthy person's habit. It's not pacing, but living healthily. So other ways to increase your window of tolerance. The same things that we use to get out of illness will be the same things we can use the rest of our lives to increase our capacity or ensure that we have enough room at the top of that stress bucket if stressful events come our way. There's always going to be death, divorce, and taxes in life, but birth of a child, job change, virus, there's always going to be stress. So anything that's going to overspill that stress bucket into symptoms, we want to avoid that and make sure that we're living balanced, that we're working on these things in order to have a good buffer. So understanding our nervous system states and recognizing when it starts to become dysregulated, using regulation tools, having emotional intelligence, setting boundaries, working on personality patterns, balanced living, reducing stress load. And again, the speed of recovery can vary. Whenever we put pressure on ourselves that we need to hurry up and heal, that often backfires because it keeps us in fight or flight and keeps us in worry if we don't heal, for example. People can heal very quickly, a couple days to several months or a couple years. It really depends on the variables going on in that specific person's life. So just wanted to show a window of tolerance that's a lot wider. So as you expand, your window of tolerance and capacity grows. There will always be narrowing happening throughout life or opportunities for widening it. but learning the skills again to do that are lifetime skills. So learning what ventral feels like is a lifetime skill. Learning body attunement is a lifetime skill. Someone that is healthy can use energy all day long if that energy is regenerative, so to speak, if the activity is filling their cup. Of course, every human needs sleep. We need to schedule rest breaks? No, but living a balanced life is a lifetime skill. Thrive versus survive and live by a glass ceiling imposed by outdated understandings of the illness is not the way to go. So again, here in this window of tolerance, you can see that we can get hyper aroused and hypo aroused, but with a flexible nervous system and tools to get back into this window, it remains in a healthy state. So in summary, just to put in a few bullet points, in order to get out of the push crash or safe and steady cycles, you do it by understanding the illness and honoring your current window of tolerance and nervous system inflexibility. Add regulation tools to respond well. Add expansion to increase your window of tolerance. Work on emotions and personality patterns. Why are we people pleasing? Why are we assigning our worth only to our to-do list, etc.? Pursue joy and fulfillment. Most people with CFS or long COVID were type A overachievers, perfectionists. Life isn't really to outdo ourselves or outdo the next person or to be perfect. It's really to enjoy life, to have a fulfilling and joyful life. It's not a luxury. It's what our body was wired for and how life was meant to be lived. So if you're missing that point, you could be missing an amazing way to live. I do want to end with this. By no means do we have to respond to symptoms 100% well all the time. That just seems impossible. I don't know if this is a good analogy, but with any analogy, they're never perfect, right? In the sports world, a good batting average is typically 300 or higher, which means a good batter hits the ball 30% of the time. But sometimes those hits are home runs. We can just notice how we respond. And if we're getting better at responding, we're in an upward trajectory just with that itself. We also don't want to have to believe fully that it's mind body or that we can fully heal, but just stay curious. We learn by adding evidence to our pile. Experiential evidence can tilt you over into full belief. So each time you're able to shift your state, assign a new meaning to a symptom, and turn off symptoms, your belief grows. You realize that you have this superpower in yourself, and you realize that that power you have of your physiology can change those brain pathways and you can heal. If you'd like more information, you can join our Facebook community, or you can check out my services on the website provided there. And I hope you found this presentation helpful. And I wish everyone an amazing recovery back to health.